Clara had been walking for hours before she finally saw the town. Her boots were dusty, her dress was torn at the hem, and her shoulders ached from carrying a bag that held almost nothing. The sun was sinking behind the hills, spreading a tired golden light across the empty road. When she reached the first wooden buildings, she stopped and looked around, unsure if she had reached the right place. She held a letter in her hand, the paper soft from being opened too many times. It was her late aunt's last letter, the only thing giving her hope that she might find someone in this town who remembered her family. But when she asked an older woman sweeping her porch, she learned the truth. Her aunt had passed away months ago, and the house she lived in had been sold to someone Clara did not know. Clara felt something inside her sink. She thanked the woman and tried to smile, but her voice trembled too much. She stepped away, walking without direction, fighting the urge to cry. She had come all this way, believing she would find a place to stay. Now she had nothing. Not a home, not a plan, not even a friend in this town. Her legs continued moving on their own until the buildings grew fewer and the open land returned. A large ranch house stood by itself at the end of a dirt path. Its lights glowed warmly through the windows, and smoke rose from the chimney. Clara hesitated. She didn't want to bother anyone, but the air was getting colder, and her body shook from both fear and hunger. Her last proper meal had been yesterday morning. She took a slow breath, gathered her courage, and walked toward the ranch. When she knocked, she expected a harsh voice or a suspicious glare. Instead, the door opened, revealing a tall cowboy with calm eyes and wind-touched skin. His name was Daniel, though she didn't learn that until later. At first, all he did was look at her carefully, taking in the way she stood with tired shoulders and trembling hands. "Evening," he said, his voice steady. Clara tried to speak, but the words tangled. She felt embarrassed, unable to form proper sentences. Finally, she managed to say she had nowhere to stay and didn't know what to do. She didn't go into detail. She didn't talk about the long journey, the rude people she had met on the way, the nights she spent awake and afraid. She didn't tell him she had cried quietly behind bushes so no one would hear. She simply said she needed a place to rest for a little while. Daniel didn't move for a few seconds. He simply watched her, not with suspicion but with a thoughtful expression. He noticed the worn-out state of her shoes and the soft tremble in her voice. Then he stepped aside and said she could come in for a moment. Clara hesitated, but his voice didn't sound threatening or demanding. It held the steadiness of someone who helped because it was the right thing to do, not because he expected something back. She stepped inside and felt warm air wrap around her like a blanket. The house smelled of wood, hay, and something cooking on the stove. Coming too. Coming. Sit down, he said gently. You look cold." She sat at the wooden table, her hands resting on her lap. Daniel moved toward the stove and lifted a pot. The smell of warm soup drifted toward her, making her stomach tighten with hunger. He poured some into a bowl and placed it in front of her without a word. Clara wanted to refuse, to not seem like she was taking advantage, but her body didn't let her. She whispered a thank you and slowly began to eat. Daniel sat across from her, leaning back in his chair, giving her space. He didn't ask many questions. Only when she looked a little calmer did he ask her name. "Clara," she said softly. He nodded and introduced himself as Daniel. The simplicity of the moment eased her heart a little. When she finished the soup, she tried to stand, saying she didn't want to trouble him anymore. She offered to sleep outside or find somewhere else in the dark. Daniel frowned slightly, not out of anger but confusion at her suggestion. "It gets too cold out there," he said. "You won't last the night on the porch." Clara knew he was right. The wind had grown sharper while she ate, and she could feel the cold even from inside. Still, She didn't want him to think she expected him to help any more than he already had. I'll be fine, she whispered, though her voice sounded unsure. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something she did not expect. You can sleep on the porch, he said, pausing. Or in my bed. Her breath caught. Before she could misunderstand, he added quickly, I'll take the porch. You can have the bed. It's warm. His tone was calm and matter-of-fact, not unkind, not demanding, not suggestive. It was simply an offer from a man who didn't want a stranger freezing outside. Clara looked at him, trying to read his expression. There was no hidden meaning in his eyes. No selfish intention. Only concern. You'd sleep outside? She asked softly. If that's what makes you comfortable, he replied. Everything about his voice softened her fear. She had met many people on her journey, some helpful, some unkind. Some who looked at her in ways that made her uneasy. But Daniel didn't look at her like that. He looked at her like a human being who needed help. Still, she didn't want him sleeping outside because of her. She shook her head slowly. I don't want you to be cold, she whispered. He shrugged gently. I've slept in worse places. Clara looked around the warm room, at the fire flickering quietly and the shadows dancing across the floor. Her body felt heavy from exhaustion. She didn't think she could walk another step, let alone spend the night in the cold. Her voice came out as a whisper. Can I stay here by the fire a little longer? Daniel nodded. As long as you want. He sat down beside her. Not too close. Not too far. The fire crackled softly. Clara leaned back in her chair, her eyes fluttering shut for a moment. She tried to sit upright again, but her body refused. The warmth, the safety, the silence, it all felt too comforting. She hadn't felt something like this in so long. Daniel noticed her head drooping and quietly shifted his chair a little closer in case she slipped. When she leaned sideways without noticing, her head rested lightly against his shoulder. She murmured something half asleep, something that sounded like an apology. But Daniel only stayed still. He didn't move her or clear his throat or try to wake her. He simply sat with steady patience, letting her rest. Her breathing slowed. Her tense shoulders softened. She looked peaceful for the first time since she had arrived. Daniel felt something shift in his chest as he watched her sleep. He didn't know her story, but he could tell she had walked through too much hardship. Anyone could see it in the way she held herself, in the way her eyes darted nervously when she first spoke. He adjusted a blanket around her gently, careful not to wake her. She didn't stir. The fire warmed them both, and the night grew quieter. Clara didn't mean to fall asleep in his arms. But she did. And Daniel stayed exactly where he was, letting her rest without fear, without questions, without pressure. The night continued softly, and for the first time in a long time, Clara slept with a feeling she had forgotten existed safety. Clara woke before the sun had fully risen. The soft glow of dawn slipped through the curtains, painting the room in pale orange. She blinked slowly, trying to remember where she was. The warmth of the blanket around her reminded her of the night before, and when she lifted her head, she realized she had fallen asleep leaning against Daniel. Her face warmed with embarrassment. She sat up quickly, brushing her hair back with trembling fingers. Daniel, sitting in the same chair where she had left him, opened his eyes as if he had only been lightly resting. "Morning," he said in a calm voice, not sounding bothered at all. Clara looked down, feeling shy. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to fall asleep like that." Daniel shook his head gently. "You were tired. Anyone could see that." Something in his tone made her chest soften. He wasn't teasing her or acting as if she had done something wrong. He simply accepted it, as though offering comfort was the most natural thing in the world. She looked around the room, feeling her nerves settle slowly. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, filling the room with gentle heat. Outside, birds were beginning to sing, and the ranch felt peaceful, Daniel stood and stretched his arms. "I'll make breakfast," he said. "You sit and rest a bit more." Clara tried to protest, saying she could help, but he lifted a hand slightly, not in command, but in reassurance. "You've walked too far already. Let me handle this." She nodded shyly. While he moved around the kitchen, she watched him quietly. His movements were steady and practiced, as though he had lived this life for a long time. She noticed how everything in his home had a purpose. The wooden shelves, the old kettle, the blankets neatly folded in a corner. Nothing looked fancy, but everything looked like it belonged. When he placed a simple breakfast in front of her, eggs, bread, and warm tea, Clara felt her breath catch. She hadn't been treated with such gentle care in a long time. She whispered another thank you, and Daniel gave a small nod as he sat across from her. Over the meal, Daniel asked softly, "What brought you all the way out here?" Clara held her cup with both hands, warming her fingers. She didn't know how much to tell him. Her past wasn't tragic, but it was lonely, filled with disappointments and a feeling of never belonging anywhere. She explained slowly about her aunt, the one person who ever made her feel safe, how she had passed away before Clara arrived. She said she had hoped to start a new life, but everything fell apart when she realized she had no place to stay. Daniel listened without interrupting. He watched her expressions, the way her voice shook, the way she avoided his eyes when she spoke of the fears she carried. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "You're welcome to stay here for a while," he said, "until you figure out what you want to do next." Clara looked up quickly. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "That's true," Daniel said honestly. "But I can see you're trying your best. And that's enough reason to help." The simple, direct kindness in his words made her eyes sting. She blinked away the tears before they could fall. She did not want to cry in front of him, not when he already had offered so much. The next few days passed in a calm, steady rhythm. Clara helped Daniel with small tasks around the ranch. He never asked too much of her. He showed her how to feed the chickens, how to sweep the porch, how to gather eggs carefully without startling the hens. The work was simple, but it made her feel useful. Every evening, they shared dinner and talked a little more. Clara slowly began to smile again, soft, shy smiles that Daniel noticed even when she tried to hide them. The townspeople soon noticed Clara too. Some asked Daniel if she was staying long. Daniel always replied with something neutral, not wanting Clara to feel pressured. He didn't claim her presence, but he didn't deny it either. He simply protected her peace without making a show of it. One afternoon, while Clara was sweeping the porch, a gust of wind blew dust everywhere. She shielded her eyes and laughed softly. Daniel, who was fixing a saddle nearby, looked up at the sound. It was the first time he had heard her laugh so freely. He felt something warm flicker in his chest. She looked lighter, brighter, as though the fear she carried had begun to lift. Later that evening, the sky darkened with a coming storm. Clara grew quiet and thoughtful as she sat near the window, watching the clouds roll in. Daniel noticed and sat across from her. "You're thinking about something," he said gently. She hesitated before speaking. "I don't want to be a burden," she admitted in a small voice. "You've given me food, a place to stay, more kindness than I deserve." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "You're not a burden," he said firmly. "Not once have you been." Clara's eyes widened a little. The sincerity in his voice made her heart feel unsteady, as if she didn't know what to do with the warmth spreading through her. She looked down at her hands, trying to steady herself. "I just don't know what my future is supposed to look like," she whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. "You don't have to decide everything at once. Sometimes, the right place finds you before you're ready." His words settled deep inside her. She didn't reply, but she felt the truth of what he said. That night, the storm arrived with heavy rain and roaring thunder. Clara stood by the window again, watching the drops race down the glass. The wind howled outside, shaking the porch roof slightly. She felt a familiar fear rise inside her. The fear of losing safety, the fear of being unwanted, the fear of being pushed away. Daniel came to stand beside her, his presence steady and grounding. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "Nothing's going to happen." Clara swallowed, her voice trembling. "Why are you so kind to me?" she asked. Daniel looked at her with eyes that held no judgment. "Because someone should be," he said simply. "Everyone deserves a place where they don't have to be afraid." Those words were the final thread she needed. She felt her eyes fill with tears. This time, she didn't hide them. She turned toward him, her hand gently gripping the sleeve of his coat. She didn't try to speak. She just stood there, trying to steady her breathing. Daniel didn't pull away. He didn't step closer either. He gave her time to gather herself. After a long moment, Clara looked up at him, her expression soft, but full of something new, trust. "I want to stay," she said quietly. "Not because I need a roof, but because I feel safe with you." Daniel's chest tightened at her words. He lifted his hand slowly, touching her shoulder with a gentle, careful motion. "You're welcome to stay as long as you want," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Clara nodded, her voice too soft to reply. The storm continued outside, but the room felt warm and still. Clara stepped a little closer and leaned against him. Not out of exhaustion this time, but out of choice. Daniel wrapped his arms around her with the same steady care he had shown from the beginning. This time, she wasn't falling asleep by accident. This time, she was choosing his arms fully aware, fully trusting. The night passed quietly. And when morning came, the storm had gone. The ranch looked washed clean, the air fresh and bright. Daniel and Clara stepped outside together, ready to start the day in the new beginning they had silently chosen. Their story didn't start with promises or dramatic declarations. It began with kindness, safety, and the simple truth that sometimes the right person arrives when life feels the most uncertain. And Clara knew, as she walked beside Daniel into the morning light, that she had finally found the place where she belonged.